Hi, Tim. It is so nice to meet you. Thanks so much for being a guest on the Everything Saxophone Podcast.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. There.
There you go. There you go. Awesome. So we're recording this in December 2020, and I'm going to start off a little bit differently than the way I normally do. I usually dive into the person's history and background first, but I want to get into your most recent project out right now, which is Winter Encounters. We're going to talk about why you call it Encounters. And I was reading a bit on your blog about, how this started and some of the problems that are happening because we're still in the time of COVID, although the vaccine just came out, which is great. But yeah, let's talk about your Winter Encounters project.
Sure. I was lucky that this studio I'm in, which is part of my house here, was completed shortly before the first lockdown. And I had no idea the relevance of how sane that would keep me this year, because I've been able to be really productive and work a lot. But of course, like all of the other musicians I know, we've lost, 99% of our live work. It occurred to me, I wanted to be able to record at very high level here, which I can. I thought, wouldn't it be great to do some concerts which were filmed and edited, so they wouldn't be live, but they would be streamed at a particular time with then a live Q&A from the artists afterwards. So it's almost like you could meet the musicians in the bar virtually afterwards and ask questions, etc. So that's what we're doing. We've done one already. That was with the great Norma Winston singer and Kit Downs, and there's one coming out this Sunday as well, Leanne Carroll, and again an amazing singer. Keeping it to trios, because although the space is quite big here with COVID, etc., we wanted to space out properly. But what it's led to is an extraordinary kind of unplugged feel, where you just have, you don't have bass and drums, you've got just the three of us, so there's a transparency and an honesty in the music. And I'm just so delighted by the sound engineer I've got and the cinematographer I've got are just extraordinary. So it's made it look like a beautiful kind of BBC documentary kind of thing, And I think it's going to take off, because we've got several more in the book. Ayanna Witter-Johnson, an amazing young singer who also plays the cello. So she's standing up playing the cello and singing. And that's great. The reason why it's called Encounters is that these are not really regular bands, but musicians who have maybe played together over the time. They've known each other, but never really in this combination. Sometimes they're meeting for the first time. Sometimes people are throwing in songs and say, let's do this one. And so, I may be playing it for the first time. And that's wonderfully honest, and maybe a little bit crazy of me to say, yeah, okay, I'll do that, So sometimes I'm kind of just out of the camera's view. I've got the music written there, kind of more or less sight reading.
I was going to ask you about that. So I'm going to backtrack just a second. So the instrumentation that's involved, and what are you playing? You're playing saxophones, or are you playing keyboards?
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing?
So it's every time I'll just be playing either soprano, tenor, or bass clarinet. And it'll be normally, because I've got a good piano in here, there'll be a great piano player with in January. Gwilym Simcock is coming back from Germany to do one, hopefully. And the third person so far most of the time has been a singer, but I mean, we'll vary it. And if restrictions allow, we could have 4 or 5 musicians in here. But the idea is really to represent musicians in a very high-class way, in a way which is becoming of these world-class musicians, because so many people have been forced into a kind of a lockdown mentality. It's almost become a bit like busking on the street sometimes, where you see putting their stuff out, which might be musically excellent, but if it's just like someone's iPhone in a kitchen, it's like, yeah, okay, let's see if we can make sure that everyone who passes through is represented as best as we possibly can get them. And especially if you've got world-class musicians coming in to the studio. So we need to sell tickets because it's quite expensive. But these things I hope will endure. This is all we've got. These portals, which I'm speaking into at the moment, bless them, are all we've got. And I think we've had a kind of a malnourishment this year amongst the musical community, not just jazz musicians, obviously, but we are desperate to share ourselves with the audience. And I think at the very least, if we can put out things which are really well edited and beautifully mixed, there won't be any compromise in that area at all. And lockdown or no lockdown, these will become assets and enjoyed, hopefully, for many years to come. That's my aim.
Absolutely. And, I think also you were saying, musicians are starving to put, their works out there, to get it out to the audience. But, as a parallel, the audience is starving to hear music, to be inspired, to be taken away from all the misery of 2020 as well.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I did a little Instagram ad earlier on. My son is helping me with this. I'm starting to sound really old, but he's great at all this. And it just occurred to me to say, right now we can't travel to you, but you don't have to travel very far to come to us. We'll put it out there. The tickets are all available there on ViewStub and through my website, etc. And this is the best we can do. I mean, I think a lot of musicians would share the same feelings as I do, is when you meet people after the concerts, sometimes it's like a third set, because you may be talking for 45 minutes to members of the audience, signing CDs or just chatting. And you realize just what an important part of the concert that is for many of the audience. And also, especially if you're on tour, for you as an artist, if I'm traveling around in Europe or America away from my family, etc., in a way, your extended family almost becomes the audience,
Oh my gosh, absolutely. What's really incredible that you're doing that many people may not be, and it's adding that element of the Q&A, the live Q&A with the audience. But I hope, listen, I mentioned before, like the misery of 2020, right? There are opportunities here. And just to give an example, and then we'll get back to your example too, but there's a local establishment called the Baked Potato here in Los Angeles. Very well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, most people know about the Baked Potato. They were really smart. They started to live stream, and they started to make the live stream accessible all over the world, and make the replays accessible, like $5 or $6.
Yeah.
So, the thought process is for those artists who, we're struggling right now, find a way to live stream or get really good recordings and, of your live shows. And also, have some kind of VIP type of thing where you can sell this to your, to your audiences, to your fans and stuff like that. I'm wondering if after all these winter encounters, whether you may continue something like this in your studio since you have the space, but also even when you're traveling, if this is just a thought that you may have for the, for the future when we're able to get a handle on the pandemic and we're able to do what we can do again.
I think so. I mean, I'm very much hoping that spring encounters, summer encounters, that's naturally going to follow if we can. I mean, it does depend in the end on whether we can continue to afford it. But I think that most definitely these will continue to be available. So if you miss the initial stream, you'll miss the Q&A, but yet you'll be able to call it up afterwards. And hopefully there'll be a nice catalogue build up. And, I'm very much into trying to help. I mean, a lot of the musicians around me have been affected more than me actually at the moment. So if there's anything I can do which just sort of helps the community, because we'll all die without it. This was our life calling, and nobody expected to have this kind of hardship. I mean, it is amazing that the vaccine has sort of come so quickly, thank goodness. Yeah. It's not entirely surprising because the amount of technology we've got these days is just mind-blowing. So I'm just looking around the studio, actually, the things which we have now. So I'm pretty optimistic about 2021. I think it will be slow, but there's so many things to be thankful for. I think obviously in America, a lot of things are going to change, hopefully for the better. And I have, even despite Brexit, which You know, you don't want to hear me talk about Brexit, but even despite that, I feel that there is something stirring which will be very community based, which will have at its source a lot of compassion. People will from a grassroots level be supporting artists. I mean, the things which Bandcamp are doing are growing in popularity. There's certainly more of a mass movement against the kind of streaming that Spotify are doing, which is so sucking of our energy, because it's that the royalties are so incredibly small with Spotify that although there are some benefits, of course, because it's so easy and free to listen to the music, there's no long-term plan. There will not be any music because no one will be able to afford it, you know?
Yeah, you know what? I'm curious though. In Europe, okay, so your guys' take on Spotify, like what kind of underground type of things are happening politically? You know, like Taylor Swift had a big campaign against Spotify, but in terms of what's going on in Europe, is anybody is there like mass calls of action to?
Yes, I mean in Europe in general, yes. All I really know at the moment is in the UK, but there's one such initiative called Broken Record, which is doing really well, and is a sort of, through social media has gained a lot of traction, and a lot of high profile artists. In fact, only last week, several of them sort of testified in the government, in Westminster, say, including Jimmy Page, the kind of classic rock guitar icon, sort of to say that this is a business model that, in all seriousness, has no future. It is kind of how we ever imagined that it would have been possible, how it slipped past the net, because it's completely unsustainable. You can have millions and millions of hits, on Spotify, and you'll still be probably earning the minimum wage in a lot of the people who work at Spotify. It's, and there is a mass movement, I think. Jazz in particular needs great spokespeople, because we are and always will be a bit of a niche, and I think it's rather undervalued, just how much we bring in and how much also the jazz community inspires other genres. Quite often it's jazz musicians who will help initiate new kind of subgenres or new ways of doing things. If you look at the Miles albums, it didn't stop there. All the way through the 70s, 80s, the things that Chick has done, and also some of the more creative jazz musicians who have forged strong links with the pop industry and created amazing, now you've got people like Jacob Collier, who you probably heard Jacob's stuff, again, amazing, has got an enormous reach. And we need to make sure that we never underplay our own contribution to music as a whole, whether we're in Europe or America. I mean, all of us are important.
Right. And, I've always found, though, that there's more of an appreciation in Europe, in Japan, of jazz music. Perhaps traditional jazz music, but also I think probably the more modern jazz music. It just seems to be that way.
Yeah, I wonder. We've got some very well-established festivals in Europe. I think the first of them was at Nice in the south of France. Certainly, France has some of the oldest jazz festivals that exist, and famously played host to many of the American greats that came over. So much so that some of them ended up coming and living here in Europe. I think it tends to go kind of around the edges, doesn't it? In the States, of you've got kind of the East and the West, and maybe jazz is never going to be the most popular music in the majority of the middle of America. But I think in a smaller way, that's true in our country too. Jazz these days has become quite sophisticated, I guess. And it's up to us, if we are going to play original music, we need to build into that equation a way of making sure that it is deliverable, that in this climate, that if you're going to play a million miles an hour and kind of going to lots of different keys, etc., that you can somehow, within your own parameters, to kind of make that attractive, make it welcoming for people. Say, look, you know, I know this is very different from what you're used to, but check this out. Try and remain in some way melodic. Try and remain in some way kind of, in terms of your timbre, compassionate, you know, what's the word? Just soulful, I guess. You know, I mean, I'm least attracted, I suppose, to the type of jazz which sounds very technical, but doesn't have that much soul. I'd much rather veer to the other extreme and just hear someone just playing a blues and playing their heart out and meaning it. You know, even if they just go up and down a scale, it's, you know, you kind of can feel it where you want to feel it.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. And it's, you know, it's so interesting because there's so many, jazz has really expanded to so many different areas and stuff. And I know for me personally, I do gravitate towards that soulful blues type of playing. And I may be a little stuck in the past with some of the people that I really, really enjoy. But there's some great players now that are incorporating that in. But I hear you when you say, you know, I was just taking a note, making music deliverable. And it's sort of like the... it's sort of like knowing where your audience is at first, and understanding that, giving them what they want, but then also guiding them maybe to, start to listen with some of that sophistication. You know, I'm curious, and this is going to lead a little bit to how, you know, music education is. I've spoken to a bunch of people from across the pond for this podcast, but I've always felt that the audiences in Europe, in Japan, were a little bit more sophisticated than some of the audiences here in the States. It depends on, I guess, you know, where you are, where you're coming from, and also your level of exposure to music, to jazz music in particular.
Yeah, I would hesitate to make any generalization because I mean, a lot of Europeans, actually, we tend to forget just how big North America is, you know, just comparing it country by country and state by state. So certainly you're absolutely right when it comes to familiarity, and it's just a human trait that we love that which is familiar. So you don't, on mainstream TV, etc., see that much jazz, even any instrumental music. In fact, most instrumental music now is consumed through movies, through film. You know, a lot of people's, and games, of course, now. Yeah, I mean, maybe the only time that kids are really listening and consuming orchestral music, for example, will be through games and movies. And so, quite rightly, I think the proms, we have the proms here in London, have instead of it being classical music every night, they've diversified, and quite often there may be a film night where the London Symphony Orchestra will be playing the themes from Harry Potter or Star Wars or whatever.
Yeah,
and yeah, sure, yeah, and so they should. You know, these places, actually the two places, you know, LA and London are probably the two places, aren't they, where we should be doing this. And although some of that music sometimes kind of is based on a sort of pastiche almost, isn't it? It's designed to kind of hark back to other composers. It's still of a very high standard, and it still has the capacity to draw in people and hopefully erode a few misconceptions. You know, it's rather like when you play a young kid Frank Sinatra, and they may say, oh, my granddad used to listen to this, and that's all they have to say. Isn't it great when you say, well, just really listen to him, listen to his timing, listen to how he's phrasing. You know, isn't that the hippest thing? And try and get them to take away the history. Just listen now. And if we can do that with our instrumental music as well, and say, you know, listen to McCoy Tyner play. You know, I mean, there's still only, and there ever only will be one McCoy Tyner, and there'll only ever be one John Coltrane. And I've always been a huge fan of Joe Lovano And I've kept in touch with Joe over the years since I was like about 23, 24 years old. And the range of music which he's done over all of these years, and the fact that you know that it's him, within 3 seconds of him playing, that is something which should transcend any kind of age group. Even the weirdest, most abstract things that he and others have done should be met with open ears by a 15-year-old and say, well, what do you think of this? Sometimes you get a really surprising response that they actually are checking the music out deeper than some adults actually.
Yeah, and what's interesting with that too, especially with the rise of satellite radio. So when I was in New York, I would always listen to WBGO, which is based in Newark. Great jazz station, and just
You
to
bet,
let
yeah.
Oh yeah, just to let people know, you could still listen to them online. I think it's bgo.org or something to that effect, bgojazz.org. Same thing in LA. There's a great jazz station here, but with satellite radio, you can get access to the Real Jazz Channel. You can get access to the watercolors, but what you also can get access to are these other channels where you can hear different styles and types of music and stuff like that, where we didn't get that growing up on the radio as much.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was very controlled by the record companies. And there are opportunities for this generation to definitely hear people that would normally not get the chance, even, I'm going to say even 10 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, when the National Theatre here in London started to reach out and do in cinemas around the country, National Theatre Night, and it would be a filmed version. Say, for example, they did Frankenstein starring Benedict Cumberbatch, and loads of people, of course, because he's become such a major star, they would have wanted to go to the National Theatre in London, but instead they filmed it, they put it out on to way up in Scotland and all around the country, and you could go to your local cinema. Then they extended it to being online, and this was before COVID happened, so they were kind of ahead of the game. Now jazz venues are starting to do that. Ronnie Scott's has done it successfully. The 606 Club, I'll shout out for the 606 Club because I love that place. That's really successfully doing streaming, and again, as you mentioned before, you can call up the old concerts. There's a gallery there that you can see old concerts. And you're absolutely right. The accessibility is like there has never been in the Western world. You're absolutely right. But then we are so spoiled for choice that sometimes that becomes a problem.
We get overwhelmed with all the choices. And, actually, yeah. And, even going off of this too, I do hope that these jazz jazz venues and stuff continue to do the live streaming, because one great thing that I hope people are seeing from this is we're able to reach people that normally would never be able to get the opportunity to see a jazz concert. Someone who's living in South Dakota, there may not be a jazz venue for hundreds of miles, but yet they could tune into the Baked Potato, and catch Joe Bonamassa or, the Vivino brothers or Bob Reynolds. I think it's just such an incredible opportunity with that. And, I want to backtrack to the Winter Encounters project for a second, because I forgot to ask this before, and I was wondering, so you're setting up these encounters, so to speak, these trios that are coming to your studio. How are you guys preparing? Are you sending, if you're playing original music, or versions of standards or whatever, are you sending the music over? Are you guys having any kind of rehearsal, or are you just kind of, just winging it basically?
It's pretty minimal. Actually, what happened with Norma Winston and Kit Downs, so they had met. I mean, Norma is, kind of right up there, having been working for decades, and Kit is much younger, but they had at least met, and we had planned to do a set. I was going to send a couple of songs because I write songs myself, and Norma was keen on doing one. Lockdown was announced, and so we thought, let's pull everything forward a week. So we just came, and then what was magical about that was the very fact that we didn't actually plan. We thought, well, we know there's a hub of music that we kind of know. I think it's important as a singer that you don't have to read if you're being filmed. So we concentrated on the things that Norma knew well. There were a couple that I didn't know so well, but I know the style. We did music of Ralph Towner and John Taylor and Kenny Wheeler. And it was kind of rehearse and then record, and then rehearse a little bit and then record. And then, so the fact that it was like a radio show where the light would go on and nothing would appear to change in the room, but you knew this was the time to deliver. And we weren't, maybe we would do a second take, maybe we would get that far, maybe even 3 takes or something, but it wasn't like making an album. You had to do it in the whole thing in 4 hours or something. And so that actually produces it, you raise the bar for yourself, and we noticed this again with Leanne Carroll, that we would make some fairly simple arrangements which we knew we could remember, and then hopefully just live on the edge a little bit, that if things actually do go wrong, as or if you're into jazz, quite often the mistakes, if you're smart, you can turn those into magic.
Yeah. And
at least some of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're saying this, you're talking about this, one of the things that I love to do when I do record in the studio, I would love to be able to do everything in one take. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But I love the energy. I love the adrenaline rush of being, knowing that, just one take, that's it. You got to do it, because it does something. It does something to the performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're always trying for that. And sometimes you go back, you do sort of 5 takes and you go back to the first one and think, oh, you know what, I had it then. But most of the time, I think it's fair to say if you've got 3 or more people and one person knows the piece really well and the other 2, they may take just a moment or 2 to settle in. So you're really coming from the same page. I think in the process of playing with a singer, and a lot of jazz musicians, I think, have been guilty of this in the past, is that the words get obscured by the amount of musical information that's going around, because we're all so into phrasing and reharmonizations, etc. If everything really should, as much as you can, be at the service of the song and the message of the song, if you can get that. And a couple of times I've suggested actually to the others that I lay out as a saxophone player because I'm just enjoying the song so much. They didn't let me because they, go, you got to play, it's your show. So, okay, I'll play. But I'm very sensitive to making sure that what is put first is the correct thing, So, for example, a couple of days ago, we were recording and Jason Rebello and I decided to do a duet. So we did one number with no vocals, and that way we could just stretch out and not get in the way of any kind of vocal agenda. And actually that really helped round out the set, that we were we included that thing there, that we were able to interact. Jason and I have known each other for about 30 years, so Jason was Sting's piano player for about 7 years, and Jeff Beck for about another 7. He's worked with so many people, Wayne Shorter, I think. And I'm very lucky that he lives in the UK, so we can continue to collaborate. And I think also you try and get working with people who are a bit better than you, if you can. Yeah. And that way we all remain students. I mean, I so feel like I'm still a student, and I can't wait if I can get some of my friends from further afield who are living in Europe and in the States over here to do the same thing, because I learned so much from them.
And it's an awesome outlook, and it's a great way to not only look at things but also to have that learning mindset and stuff. I think that's so cool. And
oh yeah, look at this. Look, is that coming out?
I'm learning music. How perfect is that? Your mug says I'm learning music. That's perfect.
I must mean it.
And right at the right time you took that drink. That was awesome.
Yeah.
But, getting back to this too, do you have any advice for people, let's say they're maybe at like an intermediate stage of improvisation, let's say, or even, people that are advanced stages of improvisation and, you're an instrumentalist. Let's say a horn player, right? And you have a singer accompanying a singer. I notice how I use the word accompanying, I guess. But, playing along with a singer, what advice do you have? You mentioned a little bit, you said sometimes they're just going to lay out. But what other advice do you have in terms of, not stepping on their toes so much?
Sure. Know the material, of course, because then, of course, where their phrases are meant to end, so you don't come cutting in over them. I mean, the saxophone is it's a big instrument, isn't it? Even a soprano's got a big old sound, and it can grab the foreground a little too readily sometimes if you're not careful. So you have to make sure that you're aware of range. So, for example, if I'm accompanying a male voice, maybe some soprano or even doubling on flute may be a great way of making sure that we're complementary to each other and you're not interfering in the same range. Similarly, if if there's a female singer who's singing much higher, then the lower register of the tenor, if you have these overlapping phrases where you're both there at the same time, hopefully that won't be a problem as well. I think one thing is that if you're doing something which is almost the same yet different, that can clash. But if you make sure that what you're doing is different enough, then again, they can complement each other in the same way as two completely different colors can look good together. So obviously, if the song which is being sung is very wordy and quite fast, kind of John Hendricks style stuff, or it may be, to contrast that you don't come piling in with more and more and more bebop, but you can find something melodic and more spacious to complement that. You'll sound better, the song will sound better. In the same way, sometimes if you've got quite a plaintive, slow melody, sometimes just breaking out and breaking into faster runs in a more exclamatory way can really add power to the song. So again, I think it's know the material and see what you can add, and don't just play by painting by numbers. Everyone's got their stock phrases they like to play. You think, I think this one will fit here. It may fit harmonically, but it may not be the right time for them, within the song for that to happen. But that's not just in song, is it? That's also in instrumental music.
True. And what I really like that you said, and I was taking a quick note, I wrote down the word colors and timbre, and I think that that's an element that, is really such great advice. If the singer is singing in a higher range, go lower. And what is striking me too is how your experience of being a composer, an orchestrator, an arranger is coming out, in your improvisation and in your working with others.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, in a way, improvisation is composition sped up.
Yeah.
As many people have said, it's I sometimes I think of Bob Menser and the way that Bob plays. You can hear his knowledge of voicings, say how you would voice 4 trombones in a big band, for example, how those intervals would kind of act as glue right in the middle of the big band texture. Sometimes as a tenor player, he'll kind of play phrases which just go through those kind of voices. And it seems to be an inbuilt recognition. The ear will take you there. It's similar, how you hear sometimes some gospel singers and they're doing all of this melisma stuff, all of the beautiful decoration. And if the harmony changes, their decoration changes so it's inside that harmony, like Stevie Wonder would.
Yeah.
And if you talk to the people who do it really well, often they'll say it's church, is because they were brought up singing in church and they knew how to sing the inner harmonies. And although they didn't study orchestration or whatever, their ear will take them. They can understand and appreciate the inner harmonies as it goes along. If you do it in a formalized way, as I did studying composition at the Guildhall School of Music, of course, yes, all of these things do draw into your playing. But it took me 20 years, I think, to try and kind of mush all of these into something that created a unified meaning for me. It took years.
Yeah. No, this is really fascinating. And you know what? This is going to lead me to the next topic, which is how did you get involved in composition, in, arranging, orchestration. Can you talk a little bit about when that started, what inspired you, any mentors that inspired you?
Sure. Well, when I was a kid, so I have an older brother, and I kind of was very interested in the music he used to bring home as a teenager. So there would be albums by Bill Bruford and other progressive rock bands. And studying classical piano, I would hear, oh, that's kind of a groovy way of playing something that sounded almost like Chopin. Then I would be joining these things together. And I would be listening to some of the things, the Crusaders. The first saxophone solo I ever learned was Wilton Felder's on Street Life, which I can probably still play all the way through if I think about it. And so a lot of it was imitation. And another album which really changed me, I think, was when I first heard Chick Corea and Gary Burton play together. And once again, when you get to that chamber sound, one's ear is drawn to the compositional element, the fact that the piano has to cover everything, and what's the bass line doing, and how are they interacting together. And because I studied quite a lot of classical music, I wasn't scared of notation. As most of us, half the jazz musicians I know are kind of, oh God, reading. But because I had the good fortune in a way of being, forced to sight read and learn a lot of piano, I was fascinated by scores. And there was a conductor in the family. My uncle was a conductor, so he was very encouraging when I was like 10 or whatever to, have a look at scores. And I had my Panopus pad, this is all pre-computer, of course. So these big A3 size 18 stave scores.
Yeah.
And it was a joy to me to open a blank page and think, wow, it's rather like doing a painting. And by the time I went to the Guildhall School of Music, I studied with Robert Saxton, who's a very fine contemporary composer. And I think other albums, I used to listen to the Debussy and Ravel string quartets. That's a kind of unhip thing for a teenager, right? What am I doing? Listen to this. But I was also listening to, kind of some of the more poppy things, and also just wondering if there's a way to join them together somehow. Are these worlds really never... can they never interface? I'm a very typical Libran in my, star sign as Libra. So kind of always trying to look for balance. Can I join these together? So in 2009, I created an album called Libra, which did just that, which we had the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra join us. And it was my Lighthouse Trio. And I tried to do just that. So there were... I got into Benjamin Britten and to Michael Tippett, thinking of two British composers whose writing really enthralled me, because I had all of that exposure as a composition student at the Guildhall, and then I would go and listen to some real killing jazz funk in the evening, It's like Jekyll and Hyde thing going on. I'm trying to think now of albums which were really a turning point. I think another album was Belonging by Keith Jarrett, where this was some of the first jazz I'd heard which wasn't dependent upon a swing rhythm. There were more kind of straight eights and loose and free stuff going on, but yet it was so lyrical and harmonically at times quite sophisticated as well. I think I must have been about 15 or 16 when I heard that album.
Wow.
Another album which I thought was amazing was the Steps Ahead album that features Pools, that tune, Don Grolnick tune, Pools. I just remember standing in a record store. My friend of mine was running the record store at that time. He had taken over temporarily from the boss. He says, listen, we've just got this album. You like jazz, don't you? Listen to this. And he put this record on. And I was just like enthralled. I was walking around the shop just pretending to be interested in records just so I could hear more and more of it before they took it off. Michael Brecker's playing on that was a life changer for me, actually hearing him. But I think going back to the composition thing, people like Don Grolnick and others were taking jazz composition forward and relating it to the grooves that I was growing up with, related that the grooves were more straight eights. They were more backbeat orientated. They were just the hippest things. They were influenced by jazz rock. They were influenced by Jimi Hendrix. You know, they were influenced by the blues in a really heavy, deep way. That's a long answer to your question, wasn't it?
No, no, this was great because you're mentioning some amazing iconic albums, and I'm curious about mentors. Then like as you're going through school, and we'll talk composition first, and then we're going to get into saxophone, obviously, because it's the Everything Saxophone podcast. But
Yeah, you bet. I've just noticed the lamp. I love your lamp. That's
oh, thank
great.
you. Yeah, this is one of my students made that for me. Everybody wants this lamp, but I don't. My student just made it for me. I told him he should start a business.
Yeah, yeah. I hope that's not like a Mark 6 or something.
No, no, it's definitely not. No, no way. No, it's
Okay.
this is a busher, and probably not a very good working one. So
Uh-huh.
makes a great
Well,
lamp.
not now.
Yeah, that's right. Lights up the set as opposed to the
Yeah.
stage. In terms of those, so what you're saying then in terms of mentors for composition, and this, of course, for a lot of people changes throughout their life, who they're exposed to, you mentioned Debussy and Ravel, listen to the string quartets. I love Debussy's music and Ravel, as well, the French, the French style and stuff. But, going throughout your life, probably being influenced by different composers and stuff like that. So, now where you're at, let's say even after, high school and stuff like that, college, right? You're getting exposed to more things. Who were some other influences compositionally? And of course, that covers like arranging and orchestration, that inspired
Yeah.
you.
Well, for sure. When I had just left college, Johnny Dankworth and Cleo Lane, I was very close to because I basically joined their band. And Cleo was just wonderful to work with, talking of singers again, because she could take the most humdrum lyric and tell you a story that you'd remember all your life, But the thing with John is that with the big bands, and this was a bit like singing in a gospel choir, for example, if you're playing second tenor, you really hear you're right in the middle of the harmony all the time, and you appreciate what's going on as an instrumentalist and as an arranger. So I know in the end that even in his most sort of conservative arrangements he would write, I learned so much, just the mechanism of how instruments glue each other together through working with John Dankworth. I think the one that's kind of eclipses in terms of my influences has got to be Chick Corea, really, because with having worked with Chick on and off for about 18 years, I don't think there was one concert we ever did where I wasn't truly blown away by something that happened. And sometimes it was a compositional thing. He's written so many things. And the first band I joined of his was Origin. I took over from Bob Shepherd, playing bass clarinet and saxophones. And there were so many amazing harmonic twists and turns in that music. And I was already well into this kind of area. So here was someone who had found their own way and had truly mastered it. And also, I think one huge thing I learned was no matter how sophisticated or clever the idea, it has to really work on stage. It has to produce an inner life that the musicians themselves can take on and nourish. If the music is too difficult, it won't be fun enough to play.
Yeah.
And you'll suddenly find that piece doesn't work its way into the set anymore. It's like, oh, that one. The musicians have to love their music, and that was what we found with every band I ever worked with Chick. We were just so enthralled with everything he'd bring to the table. It was a joy.
Yeah, you know what? Let's expand on this. In terms of working with Chick Corea, how did that happen? How did you first get the first gig with him? Talk about that.
Sure. I did an album in 1995 it's an all UK band, and it was on a small label, and I think more or less self-funded it. But I knew it was good, and it represented me at that time. And I met Joe Locke wonderful vibes player, and one of my closest friends to this day. I met him at Ronnie Scott's, and we got talking, and he ended up having a copy of my album. When I, a couple of years later, said, I called him up out of the blue and said, you know, I'm coming to New York. It's time I met some new people. I really want to get to New York. And he said, come and stay, you know, come, I'll sleep on my carpet, you know, we'll have some fun. And Joe, being Joe, just introduced me to a lot of people. He introduced me to Billy Childs. Billy, you may know, wonderful piano player on the West Coast. Billy happened to be in New York at the time. Billy just said, have you got another one of those albums? There's someone I think would like to hear it. I thought, well, okay, you know, sure. I just happened to have a few more with me. And that other someone was Chick Corea. And Chick, years later, said, well, I knew I had to listen to this album that Billy gave me because Billy never gave me anything, you know. So it's like, I better listen to this. And a whole year went by with nothing much happening. And then out of the blue, I got this call 4 days, I think, before my son was born. So we had all of that happening in the family. Can you stand in for Bob Shepherd? We've got a tour of Europe. And of course, it was easy for me. I was in Europe already. So the only rehearsal we had on that first day was the 3 horns. So that's the 2 Steves and myself in a hotel room. And there was no piano there. So Chick just had a teaspoon and he was tapping it on the back of a chair. And it was about an hour before we went on stage. He said, let's just run through the parts. I'll be the drums.
Holy cow.
And, you know, and it was a shame that I don't have a photographic memory because, you know, obviously I needed the music on the stage. And it took me a while to wean myself off needing to read the music because I was so wanted to get everything right. So yes, it was very, very shortly after my son was born. So he's now 21. That all of a sudden we had 30 days away from home and there were 30 concerts in 30 different cities around Europe. So it was absolutely bang, 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 bang. And I was pretty exhausted by the end of that. But the cool thing is that you get to try things out. And maybe if they don't work so well, you say, oh, well, I can do better tomorrow. And as a jazz musician these days, being able to say that, to have a tour that long, is kind of tough, isn't it? You know, you get 2 dates together consecutively. These days, that's the tour.
Unfortunately, that's true.
You know, and so it was a wonderful time to delve into the inner life of Chick's music. And he was a mentor and in a way continues to be now. For the writing of music, but also for the art of band leading and of communicating what's really needed to communicate, you know, that sense of playful joy. Again, if you're going to be very sophisticated on stage, at least be a powerful personality that communicates this in a way that people can dig, you know. And that's we can say these things, of course, but you have to really grow into that over years of learning who you are. I mean, most jazz musicians, I think, will say the same thing, that their whole career has been an exercise in finding out who they are, to try and find the deepest truth that they're able to pull out of themselves as a musician. Is what I like to think.
That's the essence, I think, of improvisation too. You know, we say jazz is music is a lifetime journey, and especially improvisation. And it's, I've been saying this to a few students lately, you know, playing music, it's like going to psychotherapy. You learn a whole bunch of stuff about yourself that you realize and you've got to own, you know, and you've got to work around sometimes too.
Yeah, I think when I hear myself recorded now, it's true. I went through, I think, about 9 different mouthpieces and in playing tenor over the years, and I haven't changed for the last 10 years. And several different horns, and you end up sounding like yourself in the end, no matter what you're playing. And it's that being truly comfortable in your own skin, I think. I mean, when you're a saxophone player, there are always people who can do what you can't do, you know, and there's always, I wish I could sound like that. I wish I could get that top register like this. I wish I could play a ballad like this guy. And if you're not careful, of course, that will do nothing but detract from the beauty that you are as a player, you know. And in a way, the best offering you can make is your unapologetic, joyful self-expression, you know, warts and all. And hopefully it'll come out. I mean, I think of players say, I remember when I first met Jim Hall, the wonderful guitarist, and I met him backstage at the Blue Note in Japan. And he was so humble, and he was already quite elderly then, I suppose. And he was just saying, you know, I'm just so grateful I can still play and still learn.
Wow.
And he had Chris Potter in his band at the time, and I know how he feels, you know, because if you're in your 70s and you get a very young Chris Potter up there, you're going to learn something, you know, because that guy's a genius. And I think that's the way to go. You know, there's you feel that way of making sure that there's a certain type of courage in being vulnerable and showing that vulnerable as part of the musical expression, showing the vulnerability. That's what I mean. I mean, listen to Miles, you know, that's part of his sound comes from that.
Absolutely. And you know what? Let's go into, because you started to allude to it, let's go into the saxophone part. You started to talk about equipment and stuff. And before we even get to the equipment, can we dive into when you first started playing saxophone, you know, what inspired you to take up the instrument? We know you have a piano background. I'm going to probably make an assumption that you started off on piano. Yeah. Talk about your you know, background with playing saxophone.
Sure. Well, after the piano came the clarinet, because I had a very kind of classical upbringing, first of all. The clarinet teacher was part of a music group that involved also other people teaching saxophone. And I ended up dying to try out this alto sax, which I was allowed in the end to have as a present. And I think I must have been about 13 or 14 then. Okay. And I think the first thing I ever played was the Pink Panther. You know, it's just a great first tune to play, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this was in Canterbury, so this was in the south of England, and really just down the road from an amazing player called Tony Coe, who you may well have heard of. Tony's an amazing clarinet player, and had just happened to be, I think, on the repeats of the Pink Panther movies. He was a saxophone player. So
okay.
There's that odd connection. Yeah, and I just fell in love with the sax because it was so much easier fingering wise than a clarinet, you know. So I could, you know, immediately play all this stuff. I got into bands like who else was I listening to apart from people like the Crusaders? There was like Spyro Gyra and some of the early kind of almost smooth jazz stuff which was going on at the time. And so it was, I think my dad kind of sort of didn't really like the fact, you know, well, this isn't the kind of music I wanted my son to get into, that kind of thing. So it's kind of Dickensian kind of attitude, bless him. But I was encouraged so much at school. They could see how much I loved it. And also there was a time when I was playing piano at the school concerts where I suddenly froze, you know. I'd suddenly get nervous and sort of hide behind the piano, you know. And I never got nervous playing the saxophone. Maybe it's because you can only play one note at a time.
Interesting. Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So in school, then you took saxophone up in school, and you felt like the teachers, you know, were giving you a good enough foundation and stuff like that. Did you take private lessons, you know, at that point? But I do want to dive into that, you know, that stage fright. It could be that, you know, piano has so much more responsibility when you think about it. It's not just melody, it's chords, it's the harmony, it's the timing, it's everything. So yeah, let's dive into those things.
Sure. Well, I think you're right in the sense of you feel as a piano player that you're holding the backbone of so much together. And I was so used to doing things because I would play a lot of my own pieces. I was already writing music, you know, and I would teach it to the other school kids, and I wouldn't need the music myself. And I think maybe I had one of those kind of adolescent attacks where your mind goes, what if you couldn't remember the next thing, you know, that you wrote? You don't have any music there. Everyone else does. And it was kind of like the mind can jeopardize your own best experiences sometimes. And there was something in the growing me, age 14, 15 or whatever, that was kind of, well, you know what teenagers are like. You know, a lot of this is you're asking yourself very earnestly, who am I? Am I measuring up? Am I as good as these people? I want to be unique, but yet I so much want to be part of the group, you know. And I found, I suppose, with the saxophone that there was a lessening of responsibility because I could just sort of improvise over the other people. And, you know, you can't really go that wrong, can you? You know? But I didn't actually have saxophone lessons. I think maybe one or two. But I took all my grades on the clarinet and the piano. And then because composition just took over so much, I forgot about the saxophone for a while, and then only took it up again when I was about 19, 20 or something.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
but in that time, though, I had studied so much music. I was listening to Takemitsu, Penderecki, Berio,
Wow.
Henri Dutilleux, one of my favorite composers of all, who from that lineage of French music. He was a contemporary of Pierre Boulez. This was not atonal music, but harmonically incredibly advanced and sonorous and beautiful. And at the same time as I was listening to that, I was still drawn to Tower of Power. You know, I was still drawn to very American driven, just the truth in a really, really great groove. And it was funny because these two things seem so different. And I think also other composers have felt the same. Going back to the stage fright thing, when you write music, you've done your bit and you don't ever really have to appear on stage. You know, you can, the hard bit, it's all written down and you hand it over to these people and they play it for you. You can just sit there and applaud with everyone else. There was something in me that quite enjoyed that, not having the, you know, everything laid upon me. Of course, what happens in the end as a writer is that you get the best results when you're on stage as well, as you can direct with a certain authority. So I didn't escape not being on stage. I ended up being on stage a lot. And I think I did 1 year of straight composition at the Guildhall School of Music, and I realized that I was missing playing the saxophone, and I missed jazz too much. And I was allowed to change courses.
Okay.
So I had studied non-stop composition in all its forms, and I was really interested in folk music and folk roots and indigenous music from around the world. I just became as enveloped in it as I could. And then something happened. I think I was about 21 years old, and I suddenly realized just how much the saxophone had meant to me. And so I was able to bring all of that compositional knowledge, or aspiration anyway, to the saxophone. And maybe it was a time where I felt that you could validate anything. So you could play the simplest of blueses and mean it with your heart, but then you could delve deeply into Michael Tippett's Second Symphony or something, and find the meat in that, find the goodness in that. And by a very, very slow process of maturation, sort of join these worlds together and find something in everything, you know. And I think maybe one thing that helps nerves, going back to, because I know that's a point you wanted to touch upon, when you've done enough concerts and you've made enough mistakes, then the nerves, I think, can start to go, because you're in your mind, you're saying, well, it's never going to be as bad as what happened 2 years ago. I mean, I remember, here's something which I tell with some pride now because it's such a good story. I was on stage, we were in Belfast, I think, with Cleo Lane and Johnny Dankworth and their symphony orchestra, and I was one of the soloists at the front. So there was the conductor, who was Johnny, and me standing right next to him, and Cleo the other side, and there this huge sea of violins and the string section all around us, which was beautiful. But I had made the mistake of throwing in my concert clothes without checking what they really were. And 5 minutes before the concert started, I thought, oh, I better get dressed, and realized that the trousers that I had brought with me were someone else's. I think they were completely the wrong size, and they were far too small. And well, there's no time at all for me to do anything else now. So I ran into Cleo Lane's room, knocked on her door and said, look, I know you've got lots of pins and things because she's got beautiful clothes. Can I borrow some pins to at least so these trousers don't fall down on stage? So yeah, go for it. So I had this kind of incredibly dangerous setup going on when I went out on the stage. And I was standing, obviously the front row were very close, and I thought, well, as long as I don't hear that bing with the pins starting to go, and that's exactly what happened. With the orchestra behind me and the crowd right in front of me, I could feel these pins going one by one, and these trousers kind of starting to slip, And I'm thinking, right, what am I going to do here? Because if it looks even worse if you're trying to play the saxophone one-handed, holding up your trousers. So I know what I can do. If I do that kind of cool thing that saxophone players do when they're advertising for Coca-Cola, and you basically start to put your legs further and further apart, like you're kind of playing in that old-fashioned, heavy blues Memphis way, And so I started to do all of that for the sole purposes of my trousers not falling down. Of course, the audience were kind of quite into it. And it's like, and John was kind of, because he knew that wasn't like me, he was looking over kind of as he was conducting the orchestra. And so I got through it. And by the end, I must have been in a ridiculous position, trying to keep these trousers from falling down. And so the rest of the concert went on in a similar manner. And I just always remember it as thinking, well, whatever goes wrong, it's probably never going to be as bad as that.
I wonder if there's video available of that.
Oh, I hope not. I mean, that's going back. So I would have been about 25, maybe. So I'm 54 now. So thankfully, this was before, people had mobile phones everywhere.
You never know, though. People are very resourceful, and I wouldn't be surprised if someone listening to this podcast will be like, "I've got to find that."
Well, maybe so. Well,
that's awesome,
so be
though.
it. It's a good story, but I mean, I tell students this sometimes because it can lighten the mood. Because, say, I teach at the Royal Academy of Music, and they've got an amazing jazz course there. A lot of people have gone through it. Thinking of people like Willem Simcock, I mentioned before, Jacob Collier went through, the Kit Downs, the list goes on. And but they get, obviously, because they're doing it full time, they get really, really hung up on how good they are or how good they think they should be, and what on earth they're going to do when they leave, and is it all a little bubble that they're in which is going to burst, and the pressures, the peer pressure. And in a way, a story like that is really important to hear, because unless you go into this with some kind of lightness, you can be crushed. I think it's our responsibility, if we have got as far as becoming full-time students, or in any measure doing this for more than just fun, for becoming a professional in any sense, we have a responsibility to be a light bearer, if we can, to be someone who brings light somehow, even if it's in sad songs, even if it's in melancholy music. It is galvanizing, it's humanizing, and it's very much about our inner connections. And we have to be prepared to laugh at ourselves. And this, I always used to like the Paul Motion trio. This is where I first heard Joe Lovano play. We can talk more about Joe and other people if you like, because their sounds, I love their sounds and their approach. But with someone like Paul Motion, the drummer, it was as if the jokes were taken very seriously, and all of the serious music was taken as a little bit of a joke. You never quite knew. There was something there in between, which was just play. And I feel that in Joe Lovano's music as well, and I hear that in Chick's music in a different way. That there's this playfulness, that someone is ready to crack a joke quite soon.
That's awesome. You know, this is a great segue into. I was going to ask you. I was going to say actually, you know, all the eclectic types of music that you've listened to. I'm wondering if that inspired your tonal conception for saxophone, but you're also mentioning people like Joe Lovano as well. So, yeah, let us know, what did inspire your tonal conception for saxophone?
In the late 70s and 80s, a lot of people had those metal mouthpieces, didn't they? People like David Sanborn on the Dukoffs and Brecker, etc. And so I had a couple of Link metal mouthpieces, and I was playing in quite loud funk bands and things like that at the time. There was a band, do you remember the Brand New Heavies? This was a band that actually went on to do quite a lot. They toured the States, and I was at the very beginning of that band. I was involved with them. So that was the kind of thing I was doing. And but it's what you listen to in the end, isn't it? I got quite heavily into Joe Henderson. What an amazing sound that guy had. Again, you can hear maybe just 3 seconds of Joe Henderson, and you hear this personality who just joyfully oozing out, you know. And Joe, of course, he's kind of a slightly darker, breathier sound. You start to listen not just to the people who influence you, but you listen to the people who influence them. So you go back a stage. So then you start to listen to maybe Coltrane, but then you start to listen to who influenced him, you know, and you go back, and then I wanted to get a darker and darker sound. There was never a question of me getting a bright sound. I seemed to do that naturally, just because the first people I'd ever heard were funky players, you know, with bright sounds. That's what was going down. So the first few years of my career was all about seeing how dark could I make that sound, how warm and woofy can I make it, because it didn't come naturally to me, you know. And I started to really enjoy Stan Getz's sound, and, you know, Lester Young and some of the Rollins ballads, and like that deep sound that they would get. And I tried to work out what horns it was that they were playing, whether it was a con or a super balanced action. And I had 2 mouthpieces made for me. Freddie Gregory made a couple of mouthpieces, and even they weren't doing it for me in the end. That was I had no money at the time, and I had these mouthpieces made. I was so transfixed in this mission to make the sound that I wanted, and I knew that the more happy I was with the sound, the fewer notes I felt I needed to play. I knew that was one definition. If you're really happy with your sound, you can just sing a couple of notes and it will just bloom, and that will be it. That was my goal.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'll ever get there, but that was the thing, to try and get to deepen the sound all the time. And I started to get into breathing exercises, and how I wish I could find a sort of a third lung and stick it in there somehow to, you know, I toughened up the reeds I was playing, and I still play pretty tough reeds. And I think that when I think of players, it was hearing Joe Lovano the first time live, I think, because there was such a presence. It was quite a loud sound, but it was so deep, and the way that he would look out at everyone as he played in this kind of way of giving, and so unpredictable in the way that he was playing. The Motion Trio with Bill Frisell playing guitar was a perfect joining together for me in the 80s of something kind of pre-Coltrane, if you like, something kind of going way back into jazz history, and something completely contemporary at the same time, and totally wild and a little bit anarchic. It had all of those things. And so I got into, as a result, trios. I got particularly interested in the freedom that a trio can bring. And that too made me think, well, if there's only 3 of us on stage, I want to create the kind of sound that draws a lot of attention, I suppose, the kind of sound which is commanding. because I'm not part of a non-et here. There's only three of us, so I thought, well, how much of the stage can I take up?
Yeah, and also when you're in a trio or even a duo, your approach to performing, to improvising, is going to be different too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
For sure, yeah. So you can take more and more liberties. I mean, one thing with the winter encounters is that when you're playing with piano players who have great ears and they've got a lot of facility, rather than it being a drawback not having a bass player or drums, it's actually quite freeing. And if they're really listening to you as a soloist, then this wonderful interweaving can occur where you can actually go off at a tangent and you're freer in a way than you ever would be if you're just playing duets and trios. I think I work best when I'm playing off someone all the time. I don't have loads and loads of licks, and I don't have a kind of how would you call it? That kind of machine gun way of firing out phrases that a lot of tenor players have. I can kind of do it, but I know people who do it better. And for me, it's about the sound. And if you're really enjoying the feel of a note, then you'll just want to hold it on. You want to just milk that one note for a little longer, and the rest of the phrase will hopefully just work itself out. You're in the moment with that note and the vibration of it. And so you want to attract players to you who will dig that too. Working with Gwilym Simcock, I've mentioned him a couple of times. So he's been touring with Pat Metheny, and that's so wonderful that he joined that band. But Gwyl is one of those players who you could just play a note. Jason Rebella is the same, actually. Play a note and they will clothe it in a different harmony. So you're just basking in the feel and vibration of that one note. And because there's maybe just two or three of you, every nuance is heard, every nuance is appreciated. And I think that's one thing I love also as a saxophone player, where you've got that much space around you. You might, how you can play the same note with two or three different fingerings on a saxophone. So, and each one produces a slightly different timbre, doesn't it? Yeah. So you can choose your fingerings and it actually means something. It doesn't get lost in the milieu, it doesn't get lost in the big band sound or under someone's ride cymbal or whatever. You can hear the fizz and the timbral change, and all of that appeals to me greatly. And it probably comes down to, well, listening to great saxophone players, but also that appreciation of listening to Debussy string quartets, where the tiny changes in the timbre of the instrument actually mean a great deal. They hit you in a different way.
As a mini recap, what I find really interesting is when you were listening to the Debussy and Ravel string quartets at the age of 15 and 16, the ensembles, right, the quartets, the small ensembles, now full circle, right, you're bringing this to what you're providing everybody with now with the winter encounters, and how before you were talking about being a light bearer, right? And bringing light to the world. And we spoke about that briefly in the beginning, about what you're doing right now and how you're dealing with the pandemic, and how you're able to bring music out. So kind of bringing this full circle in a sense. I wanted to get into a couple of more things before we go, because first of all, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. You've mentioned equipment, and you mentioned how you've gone through a series of mouthpieces and stuff like that. People are going to be curious as to what equipment you're using now. Your horn brand, your mouthpiece, your reeds and stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, I have three tenors now, but my main one for years has been the super balanced action from the late 40s, I guess. And I'm fortunate because it's in really good condition. I can't remember. I did buy it in the UK, so it was already over here. And I have a Link mouthpiece, a Ebonite 8-star. And I have the Blue Box Van Dorens, and they're 3.5s. Wow. So that's getting sort of tough. It's not too tough, but probably a little tougher than average. Sometimes I shave them a tiny bit. I'm learning slowly to try and create the same sound with a weaker reed. but I actually am so used to that degree of resistance now that I play on it. So, for example, it would be very difficult for me to circular breathe on the tenor because my setup wouldn't really allow me to do that. But I'm prepared to forego other possibilities like playing really, really long phrases, etc., because I need that resistance. I like the depth, the breathy sound. It also helps me with my upper register. If the reeds are too weak, I'll just squeak up there. But if the reeds provide a lot of, kind of resistance, then I can shoot right way up to top G, and it'll still sing. I've got an Eastman tenor saxophone as well, which I bought quite recently, and that has a lovely bottom range. My third horn is the Borgani, which also has a beautiful bottom range. Maybe it doesn't travel as well. I've noticed when I was on tour that things would start unscrewing themselves. There's something about the old Selma that was just an absolute tank that just keeps going. I'm so used to the tuning of my super balanced section now that it's quite difficult to change. With soprano, and I do a lot of soprano, I've got two of those. The Yanagisawa's the solid silver model, their latest model, which is just one whole piece, so you don't get the detachable crook. That's an amazing piece of engineering. Wow, the Japanese, I mean, they I'm not sure if they even try them out. They just send them out. They know they're good. And but I do love this one. This is, what do they call this? This is the Ramponi.
Okay.
So it's got that and it's got that. Oops. So it's the curve there at the end. And
that's one piece, it looks like. Yeah,
yes, it is one piece, and that seems to make quite a lot of difference. That the whole thing vibrates. This is quite heavy, and I love the fact this Ramponi R1 is so solid. It's the once I had years ago a Busha, a curved Busha, and that too was made out of the same kind of metal, like really pre-war solid, and it just rang. And this one is harder to play at the top. It's got, those early saxophones, sometimes your top F sharps and G sharps, they don't come out, and other things go wrong, but you kind of love them too much to stop.
The sound. And it's a sound.
I mean, it's people who play cons. I mean, how do you play them? you have to grow up playing them, I guess. They're so difficult. No wonder people like the Mark VIs, because they're such a breeze to play compared to many others. I mean, even my own super balanced action is quite tough to play down the bottom sometimes. You need to really engage the whole of the diaphragm and the whole of the lower part of your body to make sure those notes really sing. But in the same way, the difficulties of playing an odd instrument are worth it. So this is currently my favorite soprano, but the Yanagisawa, I can't speak highly enough of the attention to detail. And if I was to play in a classical sense right now, maybe joining in with something orchestral or something, I would probably reach for the Yanagisawa, because it's just so in tune and it does sparkle. But as I said, this is my kind of anarchic jazz self coming out. There's a few good bits coming out, and in fact it produced very well for me on the current Winter Encounters. So that's the one with Norma Winston, and we're playing some beautiful tunes. Norma's lyrics, they're amazing, but I did quite a lot of soprano because it suited a lot of that music. So if you want to hear how this sounds, you can go to my website, actually, timgarland.com, and there are all kinds of links which will take you there. But I'm delighted with this.
Let's get into that actually as well. So give us a reminder. They can go to timgarland.com, right? Website?
Yeah, that's probably the most easy one to remember, isn't it? timgarland.com, and then there'll be buy tickets or more info, and you can see a couple of adverts and things about what this thing is. I think that these days people are listening as much with their eyes as with their ears. We're all so used to looking
Video.
at our phones. Everything is visual. So I thought, yeah, well, it would be cool in these days where we can't actually go out and gig. Let's get some good camera work happening and, see what it's like when you can see musicians improvise. And you can see how they're interacting. It helps you understand from the oral point of view, doesn't it? What you're listening to. So yes, what is it? $12 a ticket, I think. And the what's up there at the moment, I think, includes the Q&A. So like with the Q&A that did happen, that was recorded as well, so you can hear, us answering questions, etc.
Okay, so are you saying so the $12 tickets? So when someone buys a $12 ticket, they'll be able to have the access to the Q&A. They can ask you questions.
They won't be able to answer, no, because that's Sunday at 9 o'clock. That's the UK time. So for you, that's kind of like lunchtime-ish. The first launch of it, or the first stream, will happen, and then after that first stream, we're actually there live on our laptops talking. After that, the whole thing is recorded and archived, and you can access that afterwards.
Oh, okay.
So and even, I think, even only that for a limited time, because what we'll probably do is come back and do live Q&As, because that's our only way of meeting people. People write in questions during the concert. And so,
Okay.
I'm watching them too. And I'm thinking, oh, that's an interesting question. I'll store that up for the Q&A afterwards.
Yeah, I was wondering too if you've thought about like a Patreon type of site where, people would, help support this endeavor, this encounter, and they would, but with a certain amount of like a monthly donation of $5, whatever it may be, but they could put in their questions for you, and then you could answer that way.
That is a great idea. I think that's likely to happen, or something like it, when we know that we have a formula that continues to work, and that enough people are interested. So we've only had one so far. We've filmed 3 others, so they will follow on. I think in the next month, that's exactly the kind of thing we'll be looking at. I just hope that people will support this, because we're hoping to have some encounters with some younger up and coming musicians who, of course, they've lost all their work, and they're brilliant, and they don't need to be standing in their kitchen filming themselves on an iPhone. They need a professional space to show what they can really do. And if I can help, I get my ass kicked by these young musicians. I love it.
I think it's fantastic. I think it's a fantastic
let's
idea.
hope it keeps going. So many of my great friends are still they're living in America, and once people start traveling again, they can come over, and I can have some of my bestest buddies. Like Jeffrey Keezer would come back. I had a trio, Storms Nocturnes, it was called, with Jeff Keezer and Joe Locke and myself, another trio. And to be able to work with those guys again would be a dream, But just to say, yes, getting people involved who are much younger, who have fewer resources, and if this becomes a platform that people get to recognize, this Encounters series, then it will create value for everyone who's involved. So, it's worth it. This microphone was expensive. Let's make it worth everyone's while.
Absolutely. And what's great about that too, this would be great for the audiences. Also, it's like a mentoring opportunity for these younger players as well.
Yeah, I think so. I remember when I was working with Ronnie Scott, so I was 23 years old then, and just to stand next to someone that much more experienced was priceless. And obviously when I was with Chick, and I do notice now, I'm so much older, that of course a lot of the kids, these young professionals, they'll be half my age, and yeah, you bet. We learn from each other. If I was 21 or 22 and lockdown had happened, I would just be in pieces. And I can see these kids being really, really strong, and we should do everything we can to keep morale high, because we will, of course, come out of this, as we have so many other things. And it's the nature in which we come out, I think, which is important. I think what you're doing is great.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you so much. And you know, you're right. And again, it goes back to being the bearer of light, right? You know, and inspiring each other and keeping each other going. I want to end with one question, totally unrelated. It's coming out of left field, but everybody loves this question and they're curious about it. Is there a under 100 US dollars or you know, under $100 tool that you use that you just can't live without?
Let's see. Well, my metronome, I probably use my phone now, but I can't reach it. But I have one of those old, you know, kind of triangular metronomes. I think a metronome is about the strictest teacher you're ever going to get. And it's not to say that you should play in time all the time as you improvise, but you should know where the beat is. I think that's the important thing, because you might just want to weave around, but if you get lost, you know, so you need to develop a really deep internal sense of the beat. And a metronome, I guess that's what my one thing, that would be my answer.
Okay, cool. And you know what, the funny thing too, yeah, so metronome, yeah, I use my phone now too, because like tonal energy tuner, amazing, right? Amazing stuff. I have my Korg tuner from 1984, still working. It's amazing, but I gotta say the phone one is much better.
Yeah.
But in terms of, before we go, I have to also ask too, we know about your website. What about social media? What are your
Yeah.
links
So,
there?
I mean, Facebook, you know, there's, what is it? The Tim Garland Music. That's the fan page that most things go on. But there was that profile page, which I set up years ago. And most things are on both. I do get around to answering questions in the end. I'm a little bit slow, but and Instagram. Many thanks to my son for this, but because we're treating winter encounters so seriously, that there is a lot more content going on. And I should mention, of course, before the end of the interview, that my latest album, Refocus,
Yes.
which is kind of you know, a play on the Focus album of Stan Getz from 60 years ago, and we'll be sending out periodically a series of interviews where I was interviewed about all of the details of Refocus, which again is a string section and myself with bass and drums. And there'll be quite a lot about that as well. So Instagram and Facebook are the places to go. And I will endeavor to answer the questions that come in.
No,
So
that's awesome. Do you have your works also on YouTube as well?
for sure, yeah. I mean, so that's Amazon, isn't it? So as well as Spotify, you'll
No,
find.
actually, no, it's not. No, just regular YouTube, like videos and stuff
Oh,
like
just
that.
regular YouTube. Oh, what am I
Yeah.
thinking? I'm something else. Yeah, yes, I believe they are on YouTube. So there's a great label based in the UK called Edition, and the last 4 or 5 albums are on Edition. They've done a beautiful job putting out packages and lovely artwork, etc. So you'll find on all of the platforms. I mean, I've been using Tidal, and I noticed that my music is up there on Tidal. There's another one called Quobas. Have you heard of that? I think it's a French company.
Yeah, no, I haven't.
And again, I'm interested in the streaming companies that give slightly fairer royalties to the artists, you know.
Absolutely.
And I've found Tidal a real joy to use. I still have a CD player. I still have a record player.
Me too. Me too. I still have a cassette player too, actually, I gotta say. But
Even
let me
better.
ask you this question. Can people buy your albums on your website? Do you have a website store?
I don't, but I have a link straight to the Edition store, and that's
Great.
what I recommend from people. The Edition website has a brilliant store. It's really clear, and everything is there. Obviously, everything of mine, but say Chris Potter's album Chris is also on Edition. Dave Holland, Jasper Hoiby. There's so many amazing artists on that label now. Kurt Erling. And the story's there. So I rather than me trying to have a shop, because there's quite a lot on my site already about the various things I've done, I thought, let's just direct everyone to Audition, because he does it so well there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, Tim, I want to thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun. I learned so much about you, and just, from the advice that you gave and the stories and the tips, and just, how you're being creative and inventive, with these winter encounters. And then I do hope you're able to do spring encounters and summer encounters and keep continuing this. So this way you could reach people all over the world. I think it's fantastic. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.